So fellas, the UFC are back, and this week we have Derrick Lewis versus Tallison Teixeira. There's actually quite some decent fights on this card, some decent name value. If I had to rate the card for a fight night, I'm going to give it a 7. We've had better fight nights this year, but I'm not going to be mad about it. I think there's going to be some violent fights, like I said before, some decent name value, and we'll go in there with the first fight. Mike Davis against Mitch Ramirez. Now, Mike Davis came from a bit of a boxing background before MMA, goes 5-0 on the regional scene with 5 straight finishes, 100% finishing rate, loses on the Contender Series to Sadiq Youssef, gets 2 more wins on the regional scene, loses his UFC debut to Gilbert Burns, but then after that goes on a 4-fight winning streak with 2 pretty brutal finishes, and in his most recent fight he fought for Reziam and lost to Reziam in a pretty decent, a pretty close fight. Going to be taking on Mitch Ramirez, who had a massive run in the regional scene with a bunch of finishes, loses on the Contender Series to Carlos Prates, gets another one on the regional scene and just got finished by Thiago Moises in his UFC debut. I kind of feel a bit bad for Mitch Ramirez because the 2 fighters that he's had to face, they've been pretty tough. I mean, one of them was Carlos Prates on the Contender Series and the other one was Thiago Moises, who's pretty good at 155. The style of Davis, he's super talented everywhere the fight goes. He can strike, he can wrestle, predominantly a wrestler more than anything. Heavy-handed on the feet and pretty accurate, and a decent level of grappling. He can stand on the feet, he's got power on the feet, but he does like to shoot the takedown and initiate the grappling when he has the chance to. But the only problem is he's super inactive. He fights an average once a year. Ramirez, he's a powerful stand-up guy. He's got power on the feet, and he's displayed that on the regional scene, but he doesn't have the best technicality. He doesn't really have the technicality to back up the power. And again, he can wrestle similar to Mike Davis, but it's not super high level, and the better wrestler in this fight is Mike Davis. I'm going to go with Mike Davis to win this one by TKO in the 3rd round. Mike Davis is one of the better guys unranked at 155. The only issue with him is he's not active enough to get into the top 15. Obviously just lost to Reziam. He's nowhere near active enough, and that can sometimes lead to his performances being a bit stale and inconsistent. But on the regular, he's a pretty solid fighter. Again, another tough fight for Mitch Ramirez. There's no easy fights for this dude. I think Mike Davis TKOs him. I think he's going to wear him out in the first couple of rounds, win the striking exchanges, probably mix up the grappling, and then in the 3rd round, I think Mitch Ramirez is going to gas out. We kind of saw that in the Thiago Moises fight after a couple of minutes, and I think Mike Davis takes him down, gets to finish via TKO. I'm going Mike Davis to finish Mitch Ramirez. I think he's one of the biggest favourites on the card as well. So Mike Davis, TKO, 3rd round. Then we've got Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Valter Walker. Kennedy Nzechukwu goes 2-0 on the regional scene, comes over to the Contender Series, gets a win, but doesn't get a contract. So he gets 2 more wins on the Contender Series, goes back to the Contender Series and he gets on the regional scene, goes back to the Contender Series and gets the finish, loses his UFC debut to Paul Craig, then goes on a 3-fight winning streak, including a finish over Carlos Ulberg, which is edged tremendously. And then since then, he kind of just became a bit of an inconsistent, streaky fighter in the light heavyweight division with a couple of finishes. Moved up to the heavyweight division last year and got a finish over Chris Barnett and knocked out Lucas Brzezinski in the 1st round. He's going to be taking on Valter Walker, who's the brother of Johnny Walker. This guy had a massive run in the regional scene as well, becoming a champion on a couple of local promotions. Lost his UFC debut to Lucas Brzezinski, which is never a good look. And then after that, he goes and submits Junior Tafa with a heel hook, and then goes and submits Dontel Mayers with the exact same submission in his most recent fight. The style of Kennedy Nzechukwu, he's a sluggish boxer with fairly heavy hands, which didn't really do him too much justice at light heavyweight, but as he's kind of transitioned to the heavyweight division, it's done a lot of justice against these less athletic guys. And he usually does well against the less athletic, flabbier type of fighters, like a Lucas Brzezinski, like a obviously Chris Barnett. So he does well against these kind of standard fat heavyweights. And for Valter Walker, he likes to apply pressure early on and take the fight to the mat and look to submit. But against Dontel Mayers, he shot a takedown within the first 30 seconds. He wants to initiate grappling ASAP, specializes in a heel hook. He's got 2 in a row. He's kind of been posting memes about that on Instagram. And he has got very weak striking. Like I said, to take a loss to Lucas Brzezinski is appalling. But I'm going to be going with Kennedy Nzechukwu to win this one by KO in the 1st round. Kennedy's been one of the few light heavyweights who have moved up to the heavyweight division and actually had quite some success. He looked good against Lucas Brzezinski, slept him out cold. To be fair, he hasn't beaten a single good name in the heavyweight division, but neither has Valter Walker. And I think Kennedy's takedown defense is going to do him some justice. We've seen him, I know we've not really seen him against too many grapplers, but even in the light heavyweight division, this guy's faced grapplers and done well against him. And Valter Walker, I'm sorry, man, I can't pick a guy who's lost to Lucas Brzezinski too many times. Obviously, a good submission artist, and I know if people are picking him to win, it's going to be by submission, but I see Kennedy keeping the fight standing, clip him in the 1st round, and he looked awful in his UFC debut, did Valter Walker as well, so I think Kennedy gets the job done. His takedown defense is going to be enough to keep the fight standing. He's a pretty heavy-handed dude moving up to the heavyweight division. I don't think either of these guys are going to go too far in the heavyweight division, but I think Kennedy sleeps Valter Walker in the first round. Then we have Chris Curtis moving down to the welterweight division, which is a bit random, against Max Griffin. Now, Chris Curtis had a massive run on the regional scene, becoming a champion, also losing to Bilal Muhammad on the regional scene, but he had a pretty successful run. Comes over to the Contender Series, gets a KO win in the Contender Series, then goes to PFL, has a bit of a dodgy run in PFL, goes 1-3 in PFL. So he goes back to the regional scene, picks up a couple of wins, most of them being finishes, and then debuts in the UFC, knocks out Phil Hawes, then gets a knockout in his next fight against Brendan Allen, then gets a decision win over Rodolfo Vieira, and since then, the downfall of Chris Curtis has kind of begun. He ended up losing most of his most recent fights. He seems to be losing more consistently, just got knocked out in the last second against Roman Kopylov, literally the last second of the fight, and he's also one of the saltiest fighters in the UFC. If you see this guy on Twitter, or just in general, he might have one of the, the weakest mindset capacities in the UFC. Super salty. Going to be taking on Max Griffin, who had a bit of a, pretty solid run on the regional scene, becoming a champion. And in the UFC, there's not really much to talk about. He's just a bit of an inconsistent decision machine in the UFC. Doesn't really seem to put his all into fighting. The style of Chris Curtis is a boxer with heavy hands. Pretty heavy-handed boxer, Chris Curtis. Nice boxing. He does tend to struggle with guys with range or guys who have super technical striking. That seems to be a bit of a kryptonite. And he has got elite takedown defense. I'm pretty sure a few years ago, he had like a 100% takedown defense rate, which was the best in the UFC. And even nowadays, he defends takedowns more than not. So, guy with a great takedown defense with a boxing heavy approach. And for Max Griffin, he's just a back foot fighter who tries picking his opponent apart with just enough to win on points. He doesn't really seem like he's got an urge to win anymore. Any adversity, and he's awful, is Max Griffin. He's got a decent stand-up base. And again, he's not the worst grappler. Trains with the likes of Anthony Hernandez. He just doesn't really seem to want the win that much. So I'm going to go Chris Curtis to win this one by decision. I think Chris Curtis picks him apart. Yeah, Chris Curtis, like I said, he has got pretty heavy hands. We saw in that fight with Roman Kopylov. He won that first round against Roman Kopylov, and Kopilov's one of the best strikers in the UFC. Arguably beat Brendan Allen as well on short notice. Even though Chris Curtis' record might not show it, I kind of feel bad for him. Even in the fight with Kelvin Gastelum, that was arguably a robbery and should have gone to Chris Curtis. I rate the striking of Chris Curtis, solid boxer with good takedown defense, and Max Griffin, just too inconsistent these days. I'm going to go Chris Curtis to win this one, although it depends on how he does look at 170, because I never expected him to move down to the welterweight division. He's now moving down from middleweight. Hopefully he can make the weight, but yeah, I'm going Chris Curtis, picks apart Max Griffin for 15 minutes straight. Could even get a finish as well, but I just don't really see a key to victory for Max Griffin. He's not outboxing Chris Curtis. He's not taking him down. I think it's going to be a Chris Curtis masterclass. Curtis by decision. Jake Matthews versus Chidi Njokuani. Now, Jake Matthews had a nice run in the regional scene. Comes into the UFC, goes 4-1 with 4 straight finishes. Then he goes on the Ultimate Fighter, but loses in the finale to Kevin Lee. Goes back to the UFC, goes on a bit of a run until he eventually faces Sean Brady. Gets finished by Sean Brady, mauled by him. And then since then, he's been a bit of a win-loss fighter. To be fair, he's winning more than losing. And he's only, well, his most recent loss had been to Michael Morales himself, and he survived him. But bit of a win-loss fighter. Isn't going out there and putting their stamp on his performances. He's going to be taking on Chidi Njokuani, who again had quite a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Went over to Bellator, had a pretty solid career in Bellator, lost his last 2 fights. Gets a good finish on the Contender Series. Then gets a good finish against Marc-Andre Barriot. Then gets a good finish against Dusko Todorovic. Has a bit of a fall-off after that. Goes on a 3-fight losing streak, getting knocked out by Gregory Rodriguez and Makal. But since then, he's now on a 3-fight winning streak, with his most recent fight being a really good finish over Zaleski dos Santos. The style of Jake Matthews, he's well-rounded. He can strike, he can grapple, but he's not necessarily elite anyway. He does have pretty solid grappling, though. I'd say that's probably where he's better at than striking. But he can stay standing and boxing. We just saw it in his most recent fight against Francisco Prado. He was able to keep the fight standing and, just kind of outpoint him across 15 minutes. So he can do everything, just not to a super elite level, but he's more of a grappler. And for Chidi, he's a hard-hitting, accurate kickboxer, but he is quite hittable. He is pretty dangerous, is Chidi. A dangerous dude on the feet, hits hard, but he is quite hittable on the feet, not the hardest to kind of clock him. He's quite a dirty fighter as well. I mean, he misses weight a couple of times, and he's also known for groin shots, eye pokes. We saw that in his most recent fight with Zaleski dos Santos, and he does have a bit of a questionable gas tank. It's not awful, but when it gets past the second round, that's kind of where we seem to see Chidi fade more often than not. So I'm going to be going with Chidi Njokuani to win this one by decision. I think he's got better striking than Jake Matthews. If they are going to stay at striking range, I see Chidi just picking him apart, landing the bigger shots, maybe like a 29-28 to Chidi. Again, it's a fairly even fight. I think Jake Matthews is a massive underdog, and I wouldn't necessarily count out Jake Matthews. Again, his most recent fight has been to Michael Morales, but that loss to Semmelsberger really hasn't aged well. Semmelsberger, one of the worst fighters on the roster, losing to Semmelsberger hasn't aged well. But yeah, I'm going to go Chidi. I just think he's the better striker, lands the bigger shots, lands the more impactful shots, or at least he ended up being there too much grappling in this fight. So I'm going to go Chidi Njokuani, 29-28 decision win. Then we've got Fatima Kline versus Melissa Martinez. Now, Fatima Kline comes from a BJJ background. She's a grappler who's transitioned over to the UFC. She goes on a run on the regional scene, a couple of decisions on there, but quite a few finishes, becoming a champion in the local scene. Debuts against Jasmine Judavicius, loses on points to Jasmine, which I guess is respectable because Jasmine is a beast. And then in the most recent fight, absolutely destroys her most recent opponent, takes it down, mauls her to make a slapper coach. Going to be taking on Melissa Martinez, who had a really good run in the regional scene with a lot of finishes, again becoming a champion. Lost her UFC debut to Elise Reed, but in her most recent fight, got a good decision win over Ali Sardaline, which probably should have been a TKO. The style of Fatima Kline, like I said before, BJJ heavy approach. She's actually a really good grappler, and she wants to take you down and either get the TKO or find the submission. I know she didn't face the most high-level grappler in the most recent fight in Dudakova, but she has got pretty legit BJJ and grappling, which I think is definitely going to be the biggest kind of talking point coming into this fight. She's just a heavy grappler. And for Melissa Martinez, she's quite a hard-hitting women MMA fighter. She seems to have a bit of pop in her shots, and she's dangerous across 3 rounds, but she is hittable. She was losing to Ali Sardaline because of her defense in the first couple of rounds, and then just was able to get, well, should have got the finish in that 3rd round against her. So she is pretty powerful. Bit of a seized red type fighter. Not the most technical, kind of made for street fighting, but I'm going to go with Fatima Kline by submission in the 2nd round. We saw Elise Reed was able to kind of manhandle Melissa Martinez. And I think Fatima Kline, she's one of my favourite prospects in women MMA right now. That loss to Jasmine is nothing to be ashamed about. She had quite some success against Jasmine as well. She looked amazing in the most recent fight. Trains with Eri Blanchfield as well. I think she takes down Melissa Martinez, dominates her in the 1st, and then in the 2nd round, she's able to find the submission with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I'm going to go Fatima Kline by submission in the 2nd round. Then we have the return of Lauren Murphy against Eduarda Moura. Lauren Murphy's been out for a few years. And she takes on Eduarda Moura. Now, Lauren Murphy, she had quite a big run on the regional scene, becoming a champion. Loses most of her most of her first fights in the UFC. Comes over to the Ultimate Fighter. Wins the Ultimate Fighter finale. Then after that, goes on a bit of a run after losing her next run in the UFC. Gets a title fight with Valentina Shevchenko. Gets destroyed by Shevchenko, which was always going to happen. She was a massive underdog. Then out-wrestles and dominates not Lauren Murphy, Miesha Tate. And then in my most recent fight, lost to Jessica Andrade, and she's not been seen since. Eduarda Moura had a big run in the regional scene with a lot of finishes. Like I said, becoming a champion on the local scene. In the UFC debut, she was able to finish Ruiz. Then she ends up losing Denise Gomes in the most recent fight. Had a pretty good win as an underdog against Veronica Hardy at UFC 309. The style of Lauren Murphy, she's very inconsistent with her performances. She's got decent wrestling. She was able to dominate Miesha Tate with the wrestling, which was impressive. And she's got average striking, but she's 42 years old, or at least she's about to be 42 years old. A 42-year-old fighter in, I think, the bantamweight division is never, it's never something to look out for. And for Eduarda Moura, she's a pretty good wrestler. She has a wrestling heavy base, average striking, nothing insane on the feet, but she was just able to pretty much dominate Veronica Hardy for 15 minutes, which was impressive. So, good wrestler, average striker. That kind of describes both of them. I'm going to go with Eduarda Moura to win this one by decision. Lauren Murphy's 42 years old and she's been out for a few years. I'm picking Eduarda Moura, who just beat Veronica Hardy. He's a massive underdog to win this fight. And like I said, Eduarda Moura's looked pretty good. She's got decent finishing ability on the ground in the regional scene and in her UFC debut. Her only loss is to Denise Gomes, who's on a bit of a run right now. One of the more dangerous women MMA fighters. And she just beat Veronica Hardy. I'd say she's a bit of a prospect in this division, is Eduarda Moura. And for Lauren Murphy, she had a good run before that title fight with Shevchenko, and her grappling isn't that bad. She was able to out-wrestle Miesha Tate, but again, Miesha Tate's not exactly in a prime of her career, and she just lost to Andrade a couple of years back, 42 years old, hasn't really been seen since. I think Eduarda Moura dominates Lauren Murphy, gets a pretty solid unanimous decision win across 15 minutes. Could even get a TKO, but I'm going to go Eduarda Moura to win this one by decision. Then we have, now the card starts to heal with Nate Landwehr versus Morgan Charriere. Now, Nate Landwehr had a big run in the regional scene, becoming a champion on the local scene. Goes 2-1 in his first, 1-2 in his first 3 fights in the UFC, getting finished by Herbert Burns, which hasn't aged well, and Julian Erosa. Goes a bit of a run after that with a couple of good finishes in there as well. Becomes a bit of a prospect, but he got absolutely destroyed by Doo Ho Choi in his most recent fight at UFC 310 as he takes on Morgan Charriere, who had a massive run on the regional scene. Ended up losing to Paul Hughes as well in his most recent loss on the regional scene. Gets a good KO win in his UFC debut. Loses to Chepe Mariscal. Finishes Gabriel Miranda in Paris in his next fight, and in his most recent fight, he lost pretty dominantly to Nathaniel Wood at UFC London. This is going to be a banger. Nate Landwehr is kind of just like a killer big fighter. fighter, always in your face looking to scrap. Morgan Charriere is a fun-ass striker too. The style of Nate Landwehr, he's a less skilled featherweight Justin Gaethje. That's the best way to describe him. He's a featherweight version of Justin Gaethje, just without the skill, basically. He's always in your face, fun guy, walking performance bonus. He's pretty hard hitting as well, packs a punch. He's kind of made for dogfights. If there was a fighter that's made for dogfights, it's Nate Landwehr, but he's not the most technical fella. Against Morgan Charriere, who's a dangerous, quick striker, he is really good on the feet, but he can't really handle guys who have solid technique. In that fight with, what's his name, Chepe Mariscal and Nathaniel Wood, guys who are more technical than him, can't really find his rhythm, but he is a solid kickboxer at heart. I'm going to go with Morgan Charriere to win this one by TKO in the third round. I feel like this is a style that's kind of made for Morgan Charriere. It's going to be a scrap, and again, Nate Landwehr is not going to make it easy. He's going to be in his face landing shots, but Morgan Charriere, like I just said, he does well against guys who might not be the most technical caliber, and I feel like that describes Nate Landwehr. I see Morgan Charriere keeping the fight standing and just picking apart Nate Landwehr across 15 minutes. Nate Landwehr could implement the wrestling, but I wouldn't bet on it, so I'm going to go Morgan Charriere to win this one by, TKO in the third round. I think he lands a big shot on Nate Landwehr. He's a pretty dangerous striker, is Morgan. He's got some insane experience on the regional scene. His record doesn't look that good, but I don't think his record really does him justice. I think Morgan Charriere gets the job done. TKO in the third round. Lands the big shot on Nate Landwehr and just gets him out of there. And we've kind of seen Nate Landwehr again struggle with technical guys before. His most recent fight with Doo Ho Choi, he got absolutely dominated everywhere the fight went. His fight with Danny Ige, he got picked apart too. So Morgan Charriere, I think he gets the job done by TKO in the third round, but it should be a fun one. Like I said, Nate Landwehr always walking forward, looking to scrap. Morgan Charriere, technical, dangerous striker. I really don't see this fight being anything but a banger, but I'm going Morgan Charriere to win decision. Talking of bangers, Junior Tafa versus Tukkos might actually be the lowest level fight in the UFC. I mean, I'm sure I'm still a bit gobsmacked that both of these guys are on the roster. You've got Junior Tafa, obviously the brother of Justin Tafa, comes from a bit of a boxing background, goes 4-0 with 4 finishes on the regional scene and comes over to the UFC and is 2-1 with 2 decent finishes. Well, I say decent finishes. It was a good finish over Parker Porter, but his most recent fight was just slop against Sean Sharif. He takes on Tuko, who had a pretty solid run in the regional scene, beat some pretty good guys, became a champion as well, gets brutalized on road to the UFC by Ming Yang Zhang. Then after that, goes on a 3-fight winning streak with 2 finishes, gets submitted by Umar Sai, and then lost his most recent fight to Navajo Sterling and has been given another opportunity to compete in the UFC. The style of Junior Tafa, he's just a heavy-handed Samoan with the gas tank of Michelle Pereira. That's all he's known for. In the heavyweight division, I know they're fighting at light heavyweight, but in the heavyweight division, he's just a heavy-handed Samoan, and that was good enough to carry him to the UFC. He's got the gas tank of Michelle Pereira, though. He's an awful grappler. I don't know if he's ever taken a grappling class in his life, and he would be a street beef champion. That's the best way I can describe his style. He would be a street beef champion, you know what I mean? He's got the very basics to make it to the UFC. And for Tukkos, he's just another regional machine with an awful gas tank. His gas tank is also pretty bad. His defense is awful. He's just a ploddy striker that came from the regional scene that has managed to finesse himself another fight in the UFC. I don't know what to expect from this fight, but I'm going to go Junior Tafa by TKO in the first round. Yeah, I've not been impressed by Tukkos in the UFC. At least Junior Tafa has something going for him with his stand-up. You know, he's not the worst striker in the world. He has got awful gas tank, but so does Tukkos. So I see him, you know, just landing a big shot on Tukkos in the first round. And he seems to be in pretty decent shape as well. He's currently cut down to 205. Looks to be in good shape. Hopefully, that, you know, he's maybe got, I don't know, maybe he's locked in a little bit and decided to go a bit harder this time. But yeah, I'm going to go Junior Tafa by TKO in the first round. And to be fair to him, his losses to Sean, well, his fight with Sean Sharif and Marcos Rogero de Lima were both on short notice. I'm pretty sure he's supposed to face other guys at that point. And it seems like the worst type of style for Junior Tafa is a bit of a wrestler. Tukkos can't wrestle. I think Tafa lands the big shot in the first round. But again, I wouldn't bet money on Junior Tafa. I wouldn't bet money on Tukkos. Who the fuck knows what's going to happen? I'm leaning towards Tafa winning this one. And then we've got another banger. Calvin Kattar trying to break his 4-fight losing streak as he takes on Steve Goss, who's trying to increase his 5-fight winning streak. Steve Garcia, good run in the regional scene, becoming a champion. Went 1-2 on his first 3 fights in the UFC, but since then he's got not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 finishes in a row, all by TKO, and he's made himself into a bit of a prospect. And he's got some good wins on there as well. Melquizel Costa, Kyle Nelson, Chase Hooper, some solid wins. As he takes on Calvin Kattar, who again had a big run in the regional scene, comes over to the UFC and was a bit of a prospect on the rise. With some really good KOs on there as well. He was known for being a bit of a dangerous KO boxer. And then the downfall started from there. He had that fight with Max Holloway, and obviously it was an infamous fight. He got the shit beaten out of him. One of the worst beatdowns in UFC history as Max Holloway just played with his food. And since then, He destroyed Giga, and then went on a 4-fight losing streak. A couple of dodgy losses in there. You know, the one with Yusuf Zalal was controversial, and so was the one with Josh Emmett, and he got injured against Donald Allen. But he is on a 4-fight losing streak. The style of Calvin Kattar, he's a high-level boxer, one of the best boxers in this division, but the problem is he never improves or expands his game. He's always on the front foot, looking for the big shot, good mix of power and technique, but you put him against an elite striker, he usually fails. And like I said, never improved or expanded his game. He's never kind of improved into a bit of a kickboxer. His grappling hasn't improved. He's had the same style his entire UFC career. Steve Garcia, very reckless striker. He's very, very dangerous, and that record kind of displays that, but he has been hurt a few times. He's kind of like that old school swang and bang style, reckless dude on the feet, and he actually can grapple to a decent extent. He's got some nasty ground and pound as well. His ground and pound is some of the best in this division. I'm going to go with Steve Garcia to win this one by decision. Again, I don't know how much I trust Steve Garcia to win because he's very reckless, and Calvin Kattar, even though he's on a 4-fight skid, it's only been to some of the best, and he's a very dangerous dude, but I just cannot trust Calvin Kattar anymore. You know, he doesn't really seem to turn up the gas anymore. He doesn't really seem to look like he wants to win. In that fight with Yusuf Zalal, he was getting control for the first 2 rounds until the last round. So I think Steve Garcia is going to keep Calvin Kattar. I know Calvin Kattar is more of a front foot guy, but it only tends to be later in the rounds when he's on the front foot now. And I just see Steve Garcia doing the better, landing the better shots on the feet. Calvin Kattar, I think it is going to be a bit of a scrap, a back and forth scrap. Again, Steve Garcia might mix up the grappling as well. And with Sin recently, I know he was facing Sterling, but the grappling of Calvin Kattar is questionable as well. So I just see Steve Garcia winning this. He's got a lot of momentum to his name, and we see a trend of fighters who are on a bit of a fall off, not doing that well. Calvin Kattar, he's kind of washed these days. 4-fight losing streak, never evolves his game. Not an easy fight, not a super confident pick, because again, I can see Calvin Kattar landing a big shot on Steve Garcia and slumping him, but I'm going to go Steve Garcia, one of the most underrated prospects in this division right now. I think he gets the decision win, outdogs Calvin Kattar, and picks up a decision win, probably 29-28. And then we've got Tuko Tukkos versus Junior Tafa Part 2 with Vitor Petrino versus Austen Lane. Vitor Petrino was a bit of a prospect coming into the UFC, a lot of finishes, and managed to beat Rodolfo Valter in his first fight. Then goes on the Contender Series again against Rodolfo Valter, slumps him out cold, got 4 straight wins in the UFC with a finish over Marcin Prachnio and a good win over Modestas Bukauskas. And at this point, he was one of the UFC's best prospects. And then he faces Anthony Smith as a -500 favorite and gets submitted by Anthony Smith, and all of his hype goes out the drain. And then he moves up, now he's moving up to the heavyweight division after getting slumped in his most recent fight by Dustin Jacoby as he takes on Austen Lane. Austen Lane's a former NFL player who had a pretty solid start to his MMA career, fights in the Contender Series against another NFL player in Greg Hardy and gets knocked out. He then goes back to the regional scene, goes on a bit of a run with nothing but finishes, becoming a champion, gets a good finish on the Contender Series, but since then he's 1-3 in the UFC with 3 KOs, and he has just been slept by Mario Pinto in his most recent fight. The style of Vitor Petrino, he's a decent wrestler with very average striking who's usually carried by power. Most of his wins on his run in the UFC were via wrestling, like the one with Tyson Pedro and Marcin Prachnio, so he is a decent wrestler. He's got power on the feet, but he's a very, very average striker, and he's not a wizard anywhere the fight goes. You put him against a super technical wrestler, he's getting submitted. You put him against a super technical striker, he's getting submitted. But lucky for him, he's taking on Austen Lane. Austen Lane is quite hard hitting, to be fair, and he is a swinging boxer. He was actually winning that fight with Mario Pinto, but he's got a glass chin. Any big shot landed on Austen Lane's chin, and he's going to get put out cold. And he can wrestle to a solid extent, comes from that NFL background, dominated Rebellis to Spain in his only UFC win, but he lacks basic defense, which you'd expect from somebody who's green to MMA. I'm going to go with Vitor Petrino to win this one by decision. I just simply think he's the better martial artist. If anybody's going to be winning the grappling exchanges, it's going to be Vitor Petrino. He's the more technical guy on the feet to Austen Lane. I could see either of them getting chinned, but it's more likely to be Austen Lane with the chin that he's got. So I'm going to go Vitor Petrino. I think it's a very low output striking matchup that Vitor Petrino kind of does the better in the striking exchanges, because he has looked decent on the feet before. You know, that knockout win over Modestas Bukauskas has aged quite well. He held his own on the feet with Tyson Pedro, and he dominated him with the grappling. And it wouldn't surprise me if he's able to dominate Austen Lane with the grappling as well. The only way I see Austen Lane winning this one is if he lands a Hail Mary shot, or he somehow just outpoints Vitor Petrino, which wouldn't surprise me as well. We're seeing Vitor Petrino as well come up to the heavyweight division with Sin. Like I said with Nzechukwu earlier on this card, light heavyweights move up and have success. I think Petrino gets the job done by decision. Austen Lane, I mean, he got that good win over Rebellis to Spain, but he is one of the worst fighters on the roster. Anyway, then we have Stephen Wonderboy Thompson in one of the worst stylistic matchups. as he takes on Gabriel Bonfim. Now, Gabriel Bonfim is obviously the brother of Ismail Bonfim. They both came into the UFC at the same time. He had a really good regional career, undefeated with a shit ton of wins, becoming a champion on the local scene with a 100% finishing rate. Got a good finish on the Contender Series as well, followed up by finishing his UFC debut, a finish in his next fight, gets finished by Nicholas Darby, which wasn't the best look, but since then he's beat Angelusa and managed to pick up a win over Chaos Williams in his most recent fight. He's taken on Steve Wonderboy Thompson. I don't need to explain this guy to you. Karate legends, comes from a karate background in the UFC, went on a really good run to start off his UFC career, got 2 title fights against Tyron Woodley, drew in one of them and lost a decision in the second one. Then he faces Jorge Masvidal, beats Masvidal, and it's kind of just been a downward spiral for Steve Wonderboy Thompson since there. He's ended up losing the vast majority of his fights. In his most recent past 2 fights, he's been slept by Joaquin Buckley and submitted by Shavkat Rakhmonov. The style of Stephen Thompson, you know what the style is. It's a point fighting karate style. One of the best karate fighters and one of the most notorious karate fighters in the UFC. And he's got insane kickboxing when he gets in the floor. Like when he fought Kevin Holland a few years back, he beat the shit out of Kevin Holland. But he is on his way out. You know, he's getting up there in age. His performances have been getting worse. And he is quite one-dimensional. He can't really grapple. And for Gabriel Bonfim, he's just a heavy grappler who wants to take people down and choke them. It's as simple as that. He wants to take the fight to the mat, choke people out with the grappling. I think that's the best way to describe his style. I'm going to go with Gabriel Bonfim to submit him in the second round. This is a bad matchup for Steve Wonderboy Thompson. A guy with really good submission ability, a guy with really good grappling. The last time we saw someone like that against Stephen Thompson, he got submitted. So I see Gabriel Bonfim just taking him down and getting the submission win. I know Stephen Thompson in the past has kind of shown to have a good takedown defense, but you see the worst style for Stephen Thompson these days, and it is grapplers. Shavkat Rakhmonov, Bilal Muhammad, Gilbert Burns, and even though Gabriel Bonfim might not be on the same level as those guys, it's obviously he's got decent submission ability. He's got some good wins in the UFC, and whenever he does kind of shoot a takedown and implement the grappling, 9 times out of 10, he's able to get it done. I think Gabriel Bonfim gets the submission within the first 2 rounds. Even on the feet in this fight, obviously Stephen Thompson's the more superior striker, but I think it's going to be a hard ask for him to get in the floor state against Gabriel Bonfim. And Bonfim himself isn't that bad of a striker. He's a bit of a snappy kickboxer on the feet. Again, I'm not comparing him to Stephen Thompson, but I think unfortunately Thompson's going to get choked out. I think this is probably his retirement fight as well, or at least close to it. I'm going Gabriel Bonfim to get the submission in the second round. And then we have the main event, Derrick Lewis versus Tallison Teixeira. Tallison Teixeira was undefeated on the regional scene with a 100% finishing rate. Comes onto the Contender Series, gets a KO win. KO's Justin Tafa in his most recent fight, and he's already made it to a main event. As he takes on Derrick Lewis, who's obviously holding the record for the most KO wins in UFC history. And he's got a really weird kind of resume. He has wins over Francis Ngannou, Alexander Volkov, Curtis Blades, and Marcin Tybura. And he has losses over Sergey Pavlovich, Cyril Gane, Tatu Ivaza, DC, Junior Dos Santos, and Sergey Spivak. But he's been in the UFC for absolutely ages. Again, it's a bit of a mess, is his resume. If he is going to win, he's going to land some massive clubbing right hand and sleep someone like he did in his most recent fight against Rodrigo Nascimento about a year ago from now. The style of Derrick Lewis, low output boxer who doesn't really throw too much, but relies on his inhumane punching power to slump motherfuckers. He's probably the hardest hitting dude in the UFC right now, and if he wasn't for his power, he'd be flipping burgers, because he is genuinely one of the hardest hitters in the UFC, but he has got a terrible gas tank and takedown defense, so any semi-decent grappler who compares to himself is probably going to beat him. But Tallison Teixeira isn't that. Tallison Teixeira He's a tall, rangy boxer, really big for the heavyweight division. Rangy boxer. He doesn't really have the best technique for a heavyweight. He usually wins because of the size and the length advantage, which tends to be quite a lot. So, in terms of who I'm picking to win, I'm going to go Tallison Teixeira to win this one by KO in the first round, but genuinely, I could see either of these guys winning this. Tallison Teixeira is a very kind of wild striker. He leaves himself open a lot, and then when you're facing Derrick Lewis, I could see Lewis chinning him. But Lewis is one of the most inconsistent fighters. He can turn up one day, and he can go out there and beat, you know, like an Alexander Volkov by 5th round comeback, and then he can get dominated by Sergey Spivak. I just trust that Tallison Teixeira, who's coming in with momentum, obviously has some serious power, and he's obviously on the rise. I just trust him to get the win over Derrick Lewis. Backs him up, lands a couple of combinations on him. Not combinations, but starts, you know, just putting punches together and just overwhelms Derrick Lewis. But I can also see Derrick Lewis chinning him. There's no breaking down you can do for a Derrick Lewis fight. You know what it's going to be. He either chins Tallison Teixeira or he's getting chinned early on. There's no two ways about it. I'm going Tallison Teixeira though. That's my pick. If you go Derrick Lewis, it is what it is. It's 50-50. I'm going to watch Tallison Teixeira. The first bonus of the card, I think, will be to whoever wins in the main event, because it is going to be by KO. TKO. And like I said, I think it's going to be Tallison Teixeira, but there will 9 times out of 10, not 9 times out of 10, but 90% chance there is going to be a bonus to whoever wins in the main event because it will be by KO. The second bonus, I think we'll go to Morgan Charriere. This is going to be a banger. I think this is going to be one of the best fights on the card, and it probably ends in a finish. I think Morgan Charriere is going to get the finish, but like I said, it's going to be a banger. And the third bonus will be to Calvin Kattar on Steve Garcia. This is going to be a scrap. Like I said before, 2 guys who have a very in-your-face stand-up style. I see this being an absolute scrap. The fight of the night, continuing from that, I think will be Calvin Kattar and Steve Garcia. You've got a front foot boxer in Calvin Kattar who makes it close with everybody against a wild, reckless scrapper in Steve Garcia. If this isn't fight of the night, I don't know what is. And I think snooze fest of the night will probably be Lauren Murphy versus Eduarda Moura. You've got a 42-year-old Lauren Murphy coming back after a loss against Eduarda Moura, who had a bit of a stinky performance in the most recent fight. She dominated Veronica Hardy with nothing going on. I think that's probably the pick for snooze fest of the night. But those are my picks for UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Teixeira. It's a decent fight night. I think there's some decent fights and there will be a few finishes on this card. Let me know your thoughts on this card, and if you agree with the predictions. Thank you for watching.